tonight I'm going to start a series on the life of Buddha. And this is drawn from a variety of different sources. Some are historical and some are mythological. So this version of the Buddha's life comes from the Mahayana, which as a school of Buddhism did not come into existence until long after the Buddha died. So it sort of goes back and rewrites certain things and adds some miracles and some signs and wonders here and there. So just be open-minded to that stuff. It's good teaching stories. And as for names of individuals in the Buddha's life, dates, we think we've got that pretty accurate by now, but more will be revealed as scholarship continues, and we might find out that we're way off on some of this stuff. So to start with the life of the Buddha, we have to start with his previous lives. Because the Buddha, the person we think of as the historical Buddha, was born in a time and place where it was common to believe in rebirth. And who would you have been in a past life if you were going to found a major religion in this life? Well, you'd have been a holy person then too, right? So in many past lives, the Buddha was what came to be called a bodhisattva. Now this word didn't even exist when he was alive, which is why I say we kind of work backwards and added some things in. That's okay. And a bodhisattva, as some of you know, is a deeply spiritual person who has taken a vow to help relieve others from suffering. And they'll pass up on passing away into nirvana. They'll continue this cycle of birth, old age, death, rebirth, until everybody is able to get off the wheel of samsara, as it's called. So it stands to reason then that the Buddha would have been a bodhisattva prior to this lifetime where we came to know him as the Buddha. So the first story I'm going to tell you, and this is really like a series of stories, is how I'm approaching the life of the Buddha, is in his previous lifetime as Sumedha. He was a young monk, and he heard that there was a Buddha in that life, that period of time, who was speaking. Now, you have to suspend your disbelief about everything you know about geology and archaeology and say, okay, at some mythical point in the time, in past time, there was somebody else who was a Buddha, and we've forgotten all about that, and that's why we needed a new one, which is the one in our time frame. But this past Buddha's name was Dipankara, and Sumedha heard that he was speaking, and he really wanted to give him an offering. But he arrived in the place too late, and everything had been sold out, and there weren't any offerings that he could purchase. He was a monk, so he didn't have a lot of money anyway. But he saw this young girl, and she had a bouquet of flowers. And he said, will you please give me your flowers so I can make an offering to the Buddha? And she says, no, I want to make an offering to the Buddha. You know, she's not stupid. And they get to talking, and she recognizes that Sumedha, who will later be our Buddha, is a holy man on a mission. And she wants to hitch her wagon to a star, so to speak. And she says, you're going places, spiritually speaking. You marry me, and I'll give you some of my flowers. And he says, I can't do that. I've taken monk's vows. So they negotiate, and she says, next life. And he agrees that they will be together in all of their subsequent lifetimes until they both attain liberation. She gives him half her flowers. Smart woman. Okay. So then he's able to go and hear Dipankara, this past Buddha, talk. And he presents the flowers, and he even throws himself down on the mud for Dipankara to walk over him so that he doesn't, the whole holy being doesn't have to step in the mud. And Dipankara sees Sumedha. Remember, Sumedha is going to be our Buddha, and prophesies, you're going to be a Buddha. So that's very interesting there. So then Sumedha finishes out his normal human lifetime and passes away. And because he's a good and holy person, he goes into one of the heaven realms. Now understand in Buddhist cosmology that humans are kind of in the middle. There's animals below us and hungry ghosts and hell realms, and above us there are two different heaven realms. And this is the upper one. So the Buddha has been a good person. Sumedha, still, he's not the Buddha yet. So he gets to go there and hang out for a long time. Their lifetimes, instead of being measured in single years, it's measured in blocks of 84,000 years. So he gets to be there and enjoy the good life for a long time. That's kind of his reward. But that too is temporary. And it's not considered ideal to be reborn there, because without suffering, there's no impetus to practice a spiritual life. You're like, life is good. I don't need to meditate. Everything's going all right, right? So, yeah, and I'm reminded of Jesus' comment about it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And that might be what he was pointing to. If you're really happy, there's no reason to work on yourself. But in any event, Sumeda's chilling his heels up there in the heaven. And he's there for thousands of years. And then a sound comes reverberating through the heavens that means that a Buddha is about to be born on earth. And the gods, who, small g, have their own roles in Buddhist cosmology, they come to Sumedha and they say, would you please go and be this Buddha? And he says yes. But to be reborn on earth, he has to die in this heaven realm. Because remember, the heaven realm is just another place. It's not heaven like some of us learned in the Christian sense. It's not eternal. So he goes into a field and he lays down, actually grove, and he passes away, and then he is able to be reborn. So now we're actually ready to start the life of the Buddha as we know him, okay, after the preamble. And that was just one of the stories of his past lives. There are many, many, many. So in this world that we know, let's talk about the names of the Buddha so that we can get clear on what we're going to call him. You hear all of these different names. Shakyamuni Buddha. What does that mean? Shakya is his clan name, and Muni means sage. So it's the sage of the Shakya clan. So we hear him referred to as that a lot. Then there's also Gautama. That's his family name, like the last name that we put on applications for things. Siddhartha was his given name or his first name, probably what his mom and dad called him. I always like to think that people probably had nicknames 2,500 years ago, and he might have been called Sid. I don't know, though. But I can just imagine little Sid running around. So those are the different names that refer to him. And he was born, we think, around 563 BC, died around 483 BCE. And before he was born, his mom had a dream. She had a dream that there was an elephant with 6 tusks that entered her from the side, and that she knew that she was pregnant. I don't know exactly what the significance of this dream is, but that was her dream. Then her Siddhartha, as we'll call him because he's not the Buddha yet, his father wanted to know what is in store for my son. So he calls the oracles together and they do some soothsaying to take a look at it. And they say, well, it could go either way. Either he's going to be a great ruler, political ruler, or he's going to be a great spiritual leader. Well, Dad wanted him to take over the family business, like everybody does, and so he wanted him to be the political leader. So he thought, this is pretty smart on Dad's part, he thought, well, if he's happy enough, there's that idea again, he won't go off questing. So let's make everything clean and beautiful and nice as we can for him. And of course the legends get really exaggerated. He never saw an old person. He never saw a sick person. I doubt very much that was true. And that would be a lot of work for somebody to do. But he didn't see a lot of it in any event. So Siddhartha's name was Suddhodana. And this is an interesting thing that's only been known for not that many years. But he might have been elected. For thousands of years we thought he was a inherited king, and it turns out that might not have been the case because they did have republican forms of government in ancient India. Isn't that interesting? And the collection of townspeople in a given area were called Sangha. It just meant the community at that point. It became the spiritual community on the path later on. So this all takes place in the foothills of Nepal. Siddhartha's mother Maya has had this dream. It's now time for her to give birth. So she goes to a beautiful grove that she had loved ever since she was a child. She walks there and she gives birth standing up, holding on to a tree. I have no problem with that part of the story. But when baby Siddhartha comes out from her armpit, I'm a skeptic. I'm just I'm not real sure about that one. But regardless, the tree became the first symbol to be associated with our historical Buddha and with Buddhism. And the tree will feature prominently in his life on the night of his enlightenment experience as well. So baby Siddhartha is born, the earth quakes, he is able to walk, he immediately takes 7 steps in each of the 4 cardinal directions, he's able to speak, he says, I am leader and guide of the world, and this is my last birth. That's a great story, and that's what I personally see it as. Now, there are Buddhists in the world who believe that this happened, and I'm not going to say it didn't because I wasn't there. But if you ask me, what do I think? Probably not so much. I think maybe that got added later. As with most of the founders of the world religions, they had a great birth story, which got written after they founded the world religion. And this is no exception to that. So when he was 5 days old, there was a big party and there was a baby naming ceremony. And then when he was 7 days old, his mother, Maya, died. I know, it was very sad. But luckily, she had a younger sister. And, you know, it's ancient times. You wanted to keep the power along family lines, much like some royal families in parts of the world do today. And so Dad remarried Pranapaji, who was his aunt, Siddhartha's aunt/stepmother. And she already had some children. Where her first husband was, I don't know. But she took care of him just the same as her kids and raised them all together. So Suddhodana didn't want his son Siddhartha to renounce the world, and he made the classic parental mistake of overprotecting him. And at some point, the kid's going to get curious. What's outside the palace walls? What do you not want me to see, Dad? So he grows up in a lot of luxury and comfort, and then he has an arranged marriage when he is 16 to his cousin. Again, keep the political power close. His cousin Yashodhara, who was also 16, and supposedly they had the same birthday. And now she was the woman from the previous story, right? Who was hitching her wagon to the star. So she has appeared in his lives, at least his human lifetimes, all this time. And so she's still there. Neither of them remember anything about that at this point in time. So over the next 12 years, Siddhartha starts wondering about the nature of reality. And to give you an example of what his dad did try to do, he kept the roads around the palace very clean. And if his son was going to leave the palace, there would be an advance team to go out and clean up before the young prince would go out there, so he wouldn't be confronted by a bunch of unpleasantness, or at least this is how the story goes. And I can see this as a possibility for at least areas close in. So Siddhartha says, okay, the only way this is going to work is I'm going to have to slip out. So he gets his charioteer, whose name was Chandaka, and says, let's go now. What's this charioteer going to say? No, Your Highness. So they go. And it's a spontaneous trip, and the first thing that they see that's unusual is an old person. And by most accounts, this scares the young prince. He's never seen anybody that old. And so it's a little unnerving, and he says, I want to go home. So Chandaka takes him home. But then he gets curious, and so they go back out a few days later, and he sees a sick person who's leaning on another person, and he's howling in pain. And this really unnerves him as well. And he says, and each time he's asking his charioteer, what's wrong with that person? And the charioteer is explaining it to him. He says, is that normal? And he says, yes. You know, if you live long enough, you'll look like that old person. If you live long enough, you may be sick like that at some point. So this is all news to him, according to the story. And on his third outing, he saw a funeral procession, and there was a corpse being carried. And it never occurred to him that people could die. Now, at this point, he's in his 20s, so again, I'm a little skeptical. But most of us have some experience of death when we're in childhood. Either a beloved pet dies or an older family member, and that's the first time we come face to face with impermanence, and we're like, oh, this is not at all what I thought the world was like. I thought it was safe. So he doesn't have that experience until much later. And he's lost some innocence through all of this. And he has a certain amount of anger with his dad. Why didn't you tell me these things? Because we learn them gradually, right? And so one big thing, maybe the first loss of a loved one or pet when we're young sticks out. But the first time we saw somebody sick, we probably don't remember, because it just happens and it's part of the natural course of daily life. But it wasn't that way for him. So he has some anger with his dad. Why didn't you tell me about this stuff? So he goes out on one final outing, and he sees an Indian sadhu or sage. And this person looks really deeply content. And Siddhartha's saying, okay, I was happy because I didn't know this stuff happened. But this person lives outside the palace walls, and he knows about old age and sickness and death, and he's still serene. What's that about? And that planted the seed for him to go wandering. So he became dissatisfied with palace life after that. So his father takes him to a farm. Let's have a talk, son. Father-son time talk. It backfires. Siddhartha looks around. He sees the slaves who are unhappy. He sees the oxen working really hard with the yokes on their necks to pull the plows. He sees the insects being killed. He frees the slaves. He unyokes the oxen, and he tells his dad, this is not working. So, complete backfire. You can imagine his poor father, he was probably beside himself. So, around this time, Yosudhara has their son, Rahula, which means fetter, which is kind of an interesting thing to name your kid. Kind of tells you a lot right there, doesn't it? And there was a party. I believe that was probably the baby naming ceremony like we had for Siddhartha. So there's a party, and the party's wonderful. And in the aftermath, and people are drunk, and they're passed out, and people are drooling on themselves, and there's glasses knocked over, and dishes full of food everywhere. You've been to that party probably. Or seen it on TV if you haven't witnessed it in person. And so he's looking at that going, this is I don't want this life. There's got to be more than this. So he decides that very night to leave. And in some versions of the story, he slips out without Yosudhara waking up. In other versions, she wakes up and says, I had a dream you were leaving. And he says to her, wherever I go, you can go too. Now, she couldn't go right then. Somebody has to nurse Rahula. Siddhartha was not biologically equipped by nature to provide this function, so the wife had to stay and take care of the baby. And probably that was fine with her. There's nothing that says she argued. Okay, let's put it that way. She was content to stay in the palace, but she wanted to know what he was going to find. So Siddhartha goes once again to his faithful charioteer, Chandaka, and says, can you muffle the feet of the horse so we can sneak out? And Chandaka says yes. And they take Siddhartha's favorite horse, whose name is Kantaka. And I love the fact that the name of the horse was recorded, that someone thought that was important enough to note the name of Siddhartha's favorite horse. And 2,600 years later, 2,500 or so, we still have it. So they're taking off, and it is on the full moon. And Siddhartha is looking back at the palace from at the top of a hill, and it's the last of a series of hills before he's going to pass down and not be able to see the palace anymore. So he's looking back at it, and the demon Mara appeared and tries to tempt him and says, this is fascinating to me, go back and I'll make you a universal monarch in 7 days. Not now, not right now, but in the future. Right? We're always grasping at something that's in the future. And I'm sure had Siddhartha done it, something else would have happened. Oh, it'll be put off because of this. It'll be put off because of that, right? And don't we find ourselves in that cycle so many times when there's something that we want, that we're just grasping and clinging endlessly for it. But the Buddha recognized that Mara wasn't real. Today we'd call it the shadow self, thanks to Carl Jung. I don't know how Siddhartha conceptualized it, but he knew it was a part of his own mind. And so he was able to ignore Mara and keep going. At dawn, they came to a river, and this is where Siddhartha and his charioteer parted company. He asked Chandaka to cut off his hair for him, which was the symbol of going forth into homelessness. So what he's doing, by the way, was a common ancient Indian practice, and it's still done by Indian men today, but normally after their children are raised. Once the grandkids are born, if the man wants to go off and be a wandering sadhu, he can do that, and they still do, usually in the Hindu tradition now. So this was a common thing. So there was a ritual for it already. There was the cutting of the hair. He found a hunter and he traded his clothes with the hunter. He gave all of his jewelry to Chandaka, and then he sent him away with the horse. And he proceeded on foot in the hunter's ragged clothes with this burning question: what is the cause of all this suffering in the world? And next time, we will continue on and find out more about Siddhartha's quest and what he learns.